Last week, Tucker Carlson conducted an interview with Nick Fuentes, and a lot of people got upset, like really upset, like heads must roll upset, stupid upset, wailing and gnashing of teeth upset. And now, as the dust has settled, as I've had a chance to watch the reactions to this interview, I have some thoughts. So let's talk about it. Hi folks, I'm Paul, and this is my take. When I saw that Tucker had invited Nick to be a guest on his show, my initial reaction was, okay. Controversial figure, but hey, those kind of people make the most interesting discussions. And that's the kind of reaction I expected most people to have, but no. Oh no. The way people were responding to this show, you would think that Tucker had invited Satan himself to join him for an interview. The entire right-wing commentariat dropped everything to talk about this interview, to rage about this interview. People like Ben Shapiro, Steve Deace, Andrew Klavan, Eric Metaxas, a whole bunch of others that I'm not going to go through and name, were all beside themselves that this interview happened. These pundits dedicated entire shows, some even multiple shows, to screeds against Nick Fuentes and Tucker Carlson, which is really interesting because I felt like most of what Nick and Tucker discussed in the interview was pretty reasonable. Nick explained the way he sees things relating to topics like America's relationship with the nation of Israel, the relationship between men and women, American politics, and several other issues. Tucker offered some more reasoned angles to some of the things that Nick was talking about, and in some cases, he might have even gotten Nick to reconsider some of his more fringe ideas, which, given what we're told about Nick Fuentes, how he's supposedly the worst guy ever, that should be seen as a good thing, right? Like, why are we screaming at Tucker for getting this guy, who has a massive audience of young men, by the way? Why are we screaming at Tucker for getting this guy to maybe moderate some of his positions a little bit? Why is that a bad thing? And before I go much further, and it's annoying that I even have to say this, but I am not even a Nick Fuentes guy, and much less a groyper. I find his tactics to be short-sighted, his language is inflammatory, he is as much of a persona as he is a person, and I don't think that that's always productive. But the guy is talented. He's smart, he's articulate, he's well-researched, he's funny. There are a lot of reasons that Nick has an audience. But I think the chief reason is Nick speaks honestly about issues that a lot of young men are facing, and these are issues that nobody else is willing to touch. Nick talks about things that are in the interest of young men in a world where we have been told that we have no interest. For my entire lifetime, I have been told that I must be deferential, I must take a back seat, that I do not have any legitimate interest. Nick is brash, he's crass, he doesn't care what people think. And that can come across as pretty off-putting for a lot of people. And if you are not a man under the age of 30, you're probably not going to understand the reason why he is the way he is. I saw a Firas Moded tweet the other day that was kind of an epiphany about people like Nick and the groypers. Imagine if the little boy who said that the emperor had no clothes had been ignored his entire life. For years, the boy and his friends kept saying the obvious, but the adults react by yelling at him, punishing him, ostracizing him, and outright demonizing him. Imagine what that boy would be like in his teens or his early 20s. Imagine what his friends would be like. And imagine how they would deal with the adults who still insisted that the emperor was splendidly well-dressed. That's spot on. And while I am not a groyper, I find that post to be incredibly relatable. I, like most self-respecting young white men, see a lot of issues within our society. Problems with crime, immigration, sexuality, the cost of living. So much of what we're dealing with is disordered. And for my entire life, if I were to ever point that out, I'd be chastised. I'd be told that I am part of the problem. And that kind of thing is maddening. Did I accept the lie that none of these issues were real and that none of them affected me? Of course not. But I also didn't allow it to turn me into an angry and vengeful person. But I completely understand how and why it could do that for a lot of people. Now, the reactions to this interview were particularly interesting, in that, compared to the actual substance of the discussion, the response was disproportionate. Big Con, or Con Inc., as a lot of people call them, were incensed. Ben Shapiro dedicated an entire 40-minute episode of his show, ad-free, to showing clips of Nick making offensive jokes and saying rude things and spouting off mean and offensive epithets, and then reacting to these clips in disgust.
Fuentes has said all these really obscene things, gang. How could Tucker platform this guy? He's disgusting, okay, gang?
And I'm not gonna necessarily disagree. Yeah, Nick has said some pretty terrible things. He's got a potty mouth. But okay, that's a lot of people. A lot of people talk like they're in a Call of Duty chat room. I don't like it, but I wouldn't dedicate an entire show to that. I also noticed that the people like Ben Shapiro and Steve Deace, the clips that they featured of Nick Fuentes, I don't think any of them were from the interview with Tucker Carlson. They were clips of Nick being an edgelord over the course of the last 8 or 9 years. And it got me wanting to ask people like Ben Shapiro and Steve Deace and Eric Metaxas, do you guys think that Nick has a following because he's edgy? Do you think hundreds of thousands of young men watch his show or like his clips because he is crass? Because I noticed that was the bulk of what you used to condemn Nick and Tucker for this interview. And you didn't really engage with or argue against the substance of what they discussed. Like, I don't know if Nick and Tucker are right about everything, but they presented and talked about their ideas. And the people who were upset by that didn't argue against the ideas that they talked about. They argued against the fact that Tucker decided to talk to a guy who has said controversial things. This whole dust-up felt like a rerun of what we saw in 2016, where establishment figures railed against Donald Trump. I can't believe we've got a guy with such a potty mouth running for president. How can we platform a pig like this? Yeah, okay, I didn't like Donald Trump's presentation. I still don't. What's the substance, though? Why aren't you arguing against that? Or can you argue against that? Is Donald Trump, while crass, maybe also right about a lot of things? And is the same thing happening right now with Nick Fuentes? I don't know. But back in 2016, I saw a lot of the same wailing over the idea of platforming a guy who says mean things, a guy who has rough edges, but also has a big following for a reason. And here in 2025, I can draw a lot of those parallels. And just like how there was this feeling of inevitability with Donald Trump, it feels like there might be this same kind of inevitability with Nick. Like, you can hate the fact that he's ugly and mean. I totally get that. But unless you confront the substance of his ideas, they will eventually confront you. One of the biggest points of contention I have seen lobbed at Tucker Carlson is that he didn't conduct his interview in a more combative manner. A lot of people called it a softball interview. Some people called it a whitewashing, a opportunity to launder Nick's image. Some people were really upset that Tucker didn't press Nick on some of the more controversial things that he said in the past, and instead chose to make the encounter a more relaxed conversation. Like, there's no reason you would ever bring on a guy who has been in hot water for saying some edgy things unless you're gonna confront him and get some answers for those edgy things that he's said. To which I say, Tucker can conduct his interviews whatever way he wants. And Ben Shapiro and Steve Deace and all these guys who crap their pants over it can invite Nick on and give him the dressing down and scolding that you thought Tucker should have given to him. Invite him on. Press him on the things that you wish Tucker had pressed him on. I don't know why that's an issue. And I have a feeling that they're not going to do that. And instead, they're going to continue to shout and cry that Nick is beyond the pale, which is very much outside the philosophy of how they pitched themselves, being of the free speech party. It's also worth noting that this whole ordeal has taken place not even a month's time after Charlie Kirk was assassinated. We all saw thousands of leftists gleefully celebrating the murder of a guy that a lot of us would call pretty reasonable and moderate. We saw this. We know what we're up against right now. There are a lot of people on the left side of the aisle who would be very happy to watch you bleed out and die if you are to the right of Charlie Kirk. That's literally not an exaggeration. And rather than keeping their sights focused there, directing their energy towards the threat that literally wants to kill us, Con Inc. turned their cannons to their right and started taking shots. Not even argumentative shots. I wouldn't have been bothered if that was the case. In fact, I would have been thrilled. I think it would be great if we hashed out the ideas that Nick is talking about. But that's not what happened. It turned into a hue and cry to cancel Tucker Carlson. It turned into a hue and cry to deplatform Nick Fuentes, to remove these guys from the conversation, to essentially censor them. And that I cannot abide. You only silence someone for two reasons: obscenity and the truth. And in the case of Nick Fuentes, I don't think you want him silenced over his obscene language, because you dedicated entire shows to showing clips of him using obscenities. And there are a lot of places that people can go to hear obscenity. I think maybe a lot of what Nick has to say might have some truth to it. If he is lying and his audience is captured by this lie, which I'll even grant might be the case. And if that is the case, it should be easy to destroy Nick and that lie and disband his audience with the truth. So why the hesitation? Why the calls to deplatform? Why not engage? Why is he wrong? I know Nick is rude. I agree with you. He is rude. But why is he wrong about the issues he's talking about? And if you can prove him wrong, why don't you invite him on and host him on your show and combat his ideas? Conduct the interview you wish Tucker had conducted. Why doesn't that happen? And until that does happen, I don't really know what to think. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. But what do you think? Do you think it's beneficial to be having these kinds of skirmishes, especially right now? Do you think it's weird how exaggerated the response has been to this interview? Do you think it even matters? Is this all a huge waste of time? Whatever you think, I would love to hear about it in the comments below. As always, if you enjoy my content and want to see more, I would really appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. I hope you're all having a fantastic day, and I will see y'all next time.